for us, it was really about home growing that talent, which means that it doesn't always have to come through a job vacancy. Identifying internal mobility opportunities, investing in that talent. You have to bring people along on that journey as early as you're able to and as transparently as you're able to, right? You need them to be open to change, exposing my recruiters to everything else but recruiting. We like to say that we get to drink our own champagne. Not only do we get to use a lot of our product features without being charged as if we were a customer, we get the resources. We're part of the roadmap conversations. Once you've got strong sort of knowledge base around the product, everybody becomes a seller.
Hello, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of jump in, I guess, with a bit of a kind of description of what your role is at SmartRecruiters, and kind of starting from that point.
Yeah. So I have the blessed opportunity to lead our entire global people or HR function. So I started out at SmartRecruiters leading the talent acquisition team, and my role has since evolved. And so now I have everything that encompasses the entire employee lifecycle, from recruitment, onboarding, all the way through the end of their time at the organization.
Excellent. And how many employees and how many different countries are you in at the moment at SmartRecruiters?
Yeah, great question. We've just got under 500 in over 18 different countries. So really a global organization. We allow for talent wherever it needs to be and allowing us to work as a remote first organization.
Incredible. And has that been always the approach of SmartRecruiters, or is that something that has evolved since the pandemic and the acceleration of remote work?
Great question. So it was pre my time. So I've only been here for about a year, but really accelerated due to the pandemic. It wasn't something that was a completely new concept for us, but we did have a much more kind of facility footprint globally, and we've since sort of removed ourselves from that sort of chained to an office in an environment, and really allowing for talent to be wherever they need to be, which also opens up opportunities for the employees from an internal mobility. We have a lot of employees that say, I currently live in this country. I'd like to relocate my family to another, and we have the flexibility to allow for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's hard to imagine a world before the acceleration of remote working now. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if it continues, because I know there's a lot of rumblings. I don't know if you've heard this across the kind of ecosystem, that companies are maybe becoming more adamant on people returning to work, and there's starts to become a bit more rumblings there. But I just can't imagine that it's going to go back to how it was. There seems to be so many benefits to, like you said, internal mobility, diversity of hiring, accessing stronger talent pools and more in different countries. That I think is such a huge advantage for companies now to have that it kind of doesn't make business sense, to go back to how it was.
I think it definitely depends on the type of work the organization does and the requirements of the job, but we're in a software organization. So really it does, like you said, allow for accessibility in the undefined terms, right? Accessibility of talent, no matter where they live, accessibility of talent because they're not confined to having to require to be at an office. And for us, it's not going to be something that we're going to revert back to. If anything, we're probably looking at sunsetting more of our physical footprint and moving to more of a remote first overall as an organization. I think the challenges there really allow for us to think creatively about how do we continue to drive meaningful connections in a predominantly virtual environment, whether that's, investment in in-person events that have a lot of sort of thought and approach around it, whether it's through other sort of community and connection, but that's the big focus for us right now.
Great, yeah. So many opportunities for companies to get that right. Now, one of the things that's really unique about your background is, at SmartRecruiters and also your previous role at Ceridian, you've been in this kind of unique position of both being a practitioner in the space, but also a user of the product that you're working for. So I was really interested to know if that opens up different opportunities, or in terms of the leadership positions that you've had. It'd be great to kind of talk through that and see your experience there.
Yeah, no, I love the question. I'm going to go backwards just a little bit because I actually did not join the software space prior to Ceridian. I guess TD Ameritrade was a fintech, so you could kind of make a case that we were a hybrid of financial services and technology. But really, I think the time when I was an agency recruiter and doing technology recruiting for hundreds of different companies from every sort of size, industry space, that really kind of beefed up my acumen. So when I joined Ceridian as a talent acquisition leader, that was really the first time that I was able to be a practitioner of the product as well as a leader in this space, in addition to being somebody that had a voice on behalf of all of our customers and the prospects as it relates to product design, product testing. Um, and then fast forward now to SmartRecruiters, where now I'm a recruiter by heart and now working for a recruiting software company. It's accelerated that sort of desire and the ability for us to intersect all of those in one. So I think what it does is it allows me to speak the same language as not only the business, our executive leaders, and our board, right? So I'm able to speak sort of the full product life cycle, the end-to-end journey as it relates to prospect to customer. But it also allows for me to dig in deeper to really kind of point out gaps that we may not be seeing in the user voices that we capture, in the product councils we may have, or even in some of the community conversations to say, you know what, in talent acquisition, interviewing has always been a pain point. How do we continue to accelerate, whether it's through AI or other sort of technology solutions, to ensure that we're making an impact, not just for us as users, but for the greater good. So it's been quite an exciting journey to be a part of.
And how much do you get involved, or your team get involved in the product development and testing the product and new features and that kind of thing? Does the company look to you and your team to provide that input and that insight? Because I imagine that's a massive advantage, right? Having that dynamic within the company, you've got your user base right there, who can test it and give feedback.
We like to say that we get to drink our own champagne. So it is a really awesome benefit. Not only do we get to use a lot of our product features without being charged as if we were a customer, we get the resources. So if we think about reconfiguring our system to meet our existing and future needs, we've got the resources in-house and expertise to help us get there. But to your question earlier, we're part of the roadmap conversations. We're even part of the first sort of beta users when it comes to either new features or even strategic partnerships. So if we've got a new sort of relationship that we're getting ready to roll out and expand across our user base, let's be the first ones to test it, provide that feedback, identify either additional use cases that could help in the sales process, or to help identify gaps that they can close before we actually go to market.
Yeah. And do you find, having been in companies where you are the user and aren't the user, do you find there's an advantage in terms of the performance of your team? And for example, let's say the recruiters in your business really able to, sell the product, understand the product in a kind of deeper way than maybe if they were selling to an AI tool or something like that. Do you think that makes a difference to the performance of the team and how they can, perform their jobs?
I do. I think it becomes an opportunity for everybody to be a seller. Just like you want everyone in an organization to be an advocate for your culture or your brand. Once you've got strong sort of knowledge base around the product, everybody becomes a seller. So whether you are a recruiting practitioner and you go to an event and you network with others and you're able to kind of, again, speak the same language, talk about the benefit features or where things may be an opportunity, there may be a sell or a lead, right? So I do think that there is an absolute advantage to making everybody somewhat of an expert in the product, regardless of what role they may play in the organization.
We're speaking about someone who we know who's in your business who was an ex-recruiter. You're an ex-recruiter, as you mentioned. And does that open kind of internal mobility opportunities for recruiters in your team, I guess, because they are the subject matter expert for the tool and the product, to go into sales or go into customer success or to go into different parts of the business? Have you seen success there? And is that something you actively encourage?
We do. We actually have pretty high internal mobility goals set for the year. I think a lot of companies, you probably are not unfamiliar in hearing the story after the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and all of the sort of hashtag trending topics. We saw a lot of layoffs across the tech sector globally. We're seeing a lot in terms of the perfect storm with inflation and macroeconomic conditions. So a lot of the peers that I know for us at SmartRecruiters, our focus continues to be on identifying skills through talent marketplace, identifying internal mobility opportunities, investing in that talent in ways to make sure that their experience is meaningful, personalized, etc. So we have an internal mobility goal, which means that it doesn't always have to come through a job vacancy. Could be a rotational experience. So somebody goes out on leave, somebody takes over that role for a period of time, and then they go back to their original role. Maybe it's, you know what, we open up a job and we're not so confined to a degree or set years of experience, but a set skill of talents and capabilities, and we move somebody into it. We help develop them into that space. So we see a lot of flex as it comes to this organization, which is not so defined by a job. It's really looking at what do we want to accomplish, and then who's the right person to kind of help us get to that finish line.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, one of the things I've always wondered, I know that I'm not sure how far you are with this journey, but with the rotational aspect, I really love the idea of it. I've always wondered what happens if, you know, you have someone in a new role, and the time comes for them to, you know, go back into their previous role, and they're like, wait, I love this role so much, I don't want to go back. Does that become tricky? Does that become a challenge? And how do companies manage that, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, I can kind of talk you through a few different examples, because I think it just is more of an it depends answer. When I was at TD Ameritrade, we found that we had a significant gap from a succession standpoint in terms of data analytics. We had finite resources that all had domain knowledge that nobody else knew. That creates a business continuity gap, right? And so for us, it was really about home growing that talent. So what we did is we built a rotational data analytics program. We started with one function of the business. It then expanded to the entire organization. And we started to look at feeder pools from an early talent. So looking at recent college grads, and we really built that talent in-house. So training them everything that they needed to know. They experienced different rotations within the org, and then they had a placement at the end. So in that case, it wasn't necessarily what happens if I don't want this rotation, because that was the design of the program. Whereas at Ceridian, we had a rotational program where there was a mutual commitment both by the current leader and the incoming rotational leader to say, current leader, you're keeping that head count, right? You're funding that head count. You're going down a person, so to speak, but we're doing it as a way to develop this employee. Now, the employee wasn't necessarily guaranteed the job back, right? So that was very much an implied expectation up front. Could be they love where they're at and they stay there. Could be that they didn't like it and they want to go back and the job was there for them. And if they didn't and the job wasn't, then they had to look for a new job inside the organization. So some of it comes with, I would say, stated risk, but it's all about setting the expectation. And truthfully, what is the desired outcome for the organization? At Ceridian, it wasn't necessarily to plug in talent gaps. It really was to expose people to new experiences and new skill sets. And that was really the intent. It wasn't really just like the plug and play like we had at TD Ameritrade.
Makes a lot of sense. And like most things, just good expectation setting and communication is the key. So easily overlooked, but yeah, most of the solutions to things really are that simple, and hard to execute. One of the things that's happening at the moment, obviously a lot of volatility in the market and tech specifically, and I'm sure it will trickle down into other markets moving forwards this year. But you've got a lot of experience in mergers and acquisitions, and I suspect that with the current economy, we're going to see quite a lot of M&A activity. And I really want to spend some time talking about your experience there, and things that you've learned, obstacles that you've seen, and maybe some pointers for people that maybe are going to experience this for the first time in the coming months and year ahead. I guess firstly, M&A is notoriously difficult to pull off and execute. You hear issues with difficulties integrating cultures and products, and a lot of the time maybe it doesn't work out the way it was supposed to. As a kind of talent and people leader, what's your view on M&A from a kind of high level? Is it something that you feel positively about? Is it something that you feel cautious about? Yeah, what's your view on it?
So you may hear me be a bit redundant, but I think it's all around what are you striving to accomplish? In my experience, M&A was always a positive, even if the experience itself to get there was very challenging, time consuming, redundant because we had to rework a lot of processes. Like the pain, the short term pain that we went through, I felt was really for an ultimate long term gain. So I've had nothing but really good experiences with M&A, but that's because we had a very clear, distinct vision of what we were striving to do. So what I'm implying to is my time at Ceridian, where we went through 8 M&As sequentially or simultaneously is the word that I want in a period of 18 months. That's a lot. Now, my role was not the pivotal driver. I was a stakeholder to ensure success, but primarily just from a talent acquisition operations. What I think I learned the most is you've got to identify the key stakeholders from every part of the business and ensure everybody is receiving the same information and planning towards the same goal. Oftentimes we would, as an example, we would configure a workflow to help train the new recruiting team that we were getting ready to absorb in all of these new countries, only to find out that legally we were required to do something different, right? And so having that information as early as possible so you can plan accordingly and really understand the up and downstream impact and not just within the people or the HR function. Yes, it's important for you to understand, again, how do you hire somebody legally? What sort of connections do you need to have for payroll and benefits, et cetera? But then what are those up and downstream when it comes to IT or when it comes to finance and the taxations that they need to have for consideration? So all things around identifying stakeholders, everybody works, almost every single step together versus all of these sort of siloed experiences was probably the biggest takeaway for me. There is not, unfortunately, a great sort of one playbook that fits every scenario. So as long as you've got a really strong core in terms of these are the things that we have to know or to check off, you can then pivot based on, again, the geography or the size and scope of the actual project.
And how, one of the I guess the biggest things that I hear anyway when I'm speaking to teams that have gone through M&A is keeping the engagement from both sides. I guess the company that has been acquired and the teams that have been acquired, and also the people that are in the company that are doing the acquiring, because there's lots of assumptions that people make on why it's happened or what the future might look like. As someone who is a leader of teams, how have you approached things to keep engagement high, and what do you think leaders can do to maybe smoothen that process out and make sure there's not as much fear or volatility during that process for teams?
Yeah, I think you struck a chord when you said fear, because oftentimes it's all around, like you said, we don't know why this is happening. What does this mean to me and my team? Or we've just had all these successes together as like this one collective company, and is that going away? Right. So as much as you're able to legally share, and again, part of that has to come with the way the contract is set up and any sort of provisions there, but the way that you can be as transparent as possible. And even if it's, we don't have the answers, but we would like for you to be included in part of those decisions, I think is allowing for people to feel comforted, to have a vision to look forward to, and also have buy-in, right? You need them to be open to changing systems, to change the way that they're doing things. You have to bring people along on that journey as early as you're able to and as transparently as you're able to. Otherwise, all of it feels very much like an action happening to you rather than with you. And I think that's sort of the biggest piece that I would say in terms of ensuring people feel confident in the future and also willing to lean into what that future and the opportunities hold.
And I'm guessing now, having gone through so many acquisitions at Ceridian, I'm sure every time you learned something new. But having gone through that experience, what do you wish you would have known during your first M&A experience that you now know? For people who may be going to go through this in the next couple of months or the next year or so, I think that'd be really helpful.
I wish I would have known to ask more questions rather than coming in with a preconceived. So if I think about it as a project, right, rather than coming into it, approaching it with a project with identified stakeholders and steps, I think I'd rather have done it in a way that I was doing a discovery session first. So help me understand what's current state for you. Why are you doing it that way? Because again, then you're able to translate the from to journey much easier. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to mirror those experiences, but at the end of the day too, you may uncover whether it's a new approach, a new policy, something from a cultural standpoint. You may learn all of these things that you may never have picked up. So just like the idea of why diversity talent is so important, right? New experiences, challenging points of view. So I think starting with the individuals that are going to be absorbed, if you will, like what's happening for them, taking those learnings and then starting the process of the acquisition and the integration, I think would have been allowing us to be a bit more successful faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it kind of leads on to the next question, I guess, is as a people and talent leader and people within the team of people and talent, what's the most impactful thing a leader in that space could do to support an M&A process, in your opinion? If they're looking to support the executive to be part of that journey and really add as much value as possible.
Are you referring more to a line leader or an executive? Can you clarify your question a bit more?
Yeah, like a people executive, talent executive.
And I say this a little tongue in cheek. So I would say, don't leave everybody stranded. So what I mean by that is don't serve up, we're making this big change, here's what we're expecting, and then remove yourself completely from visibility, being available to answer questions, understand and hear sort of that managing up and what are the pain points that are being experienced. I've had times where I've had very heavily involved executives and it's gone so successfully because of their, not necessarily, micro level involvement, but the ability for them to shepherd people along versus others where they've just sort of stated it, left it, and just assumed we would figure it out. And it became this almost like chaos that we had to kind of plow through that made it very uncomfortable and difficult. So I would just say be involved and really listen.
One of the themes that's kind of stood out to me whilst we've been speaking across all the different things we've discussed is, a lot of the places you've been involved is during these dramatic, periods of change. And it feels like, at the moment, especially in tech, there's this change and this shift happening, right? And we've had the pandemic and everything that happened there, the acceleration of remote working, then this big boom, for the past kind of 18 months, and now I guess kind of a new dynamic in the market that's happening, where companies may be focusing on operational efficiency and performance, and for the people inside those companies, I think it makes a lot of sense for obviously at the executive level and how companies are dealing with the current economic environment, but maybe not so obvious to the people within those companies. And I think it's causing quite a lot of turmoil and challenges for engagement just generally. And especially I know being in talent teams have really been disproportionately impacted. If you look around, if you're on LinkedIn, just every day there's massive layoffs that are disproportionately impacting talent teams. And even if your team hasn't been impacted, it's still quite a scary time and it's still quite a volatile time. What do you think talent leaders can do right now through this kind of period of change to provide kind of a strong base or kind of, for their teams moving forwards into the future?
Yeah, I love that question because I think even the course of last year to now, we saw recruiters that could write their own check, couldn't hire enough recruiters anywhere, right? Now we see the opposite, like you alluded to. Yeah. And I think it's such an interesting shift, and a very extreme shift where it's like TA has a seat at the table, value add, but once the rec volume drops, whether it's through layoffs, downsizing, hiring freezes, it's like recruiters are the first to go, right? And so we know that there's always going to be the ebb and flow of volume. So what I'm practicing and what I hope other TA leaders are able to hopefully hone in on is exposing my recruiters to everything else but recruiting. So recruiting continues to be a focus for them. They continue to perform at a high level, but I'm giving them experiences to learn different parts of the HR functions, getting exposure to other parts of the business, because what I'm doing is I'm allowing for them not only to develop, but also to add value in different ways. So if the business all of a sudden takes a huge plummet and says, you know what, we're not hiring at all. Well, now we've actually provided some justification to keep that talent because they're adding value in a different way. And so we avoid a little bit of that. Okay, let's cut everybody. And then we end up having to hire back and do all the training over again. It just becomes a vicious cycle. So I'm really trying to diversify the skill set of the team to create their visibility and create that value impact so that when we do see downturns, we're not necessarily exposing them in that way.
It's really smart. I think definitely in line with the evolution of the industry. I think we're going to see probably more automation for the lower end parts of the job. And so recruiters who are getting that exposure, I think that's really where TA is going to move to, right? It's going to move to the more senior elements of the job that can't be automated, especially with the advancements that are happening with AI and all that kind of stuff at the moment. So that's really, really exciting for your team. And I guess that kind of maybe is the same thing for you. But to finish up, really interested to hear from you what you're most excited about the future of TA and people and where it's going at the moment.
Yeah. So I mentioned to you earlier when we were doing, prior to our intro, we just came out of a company get together. So this will be a little bit of SmartRecruiters specific, but really I think it's also indicative of where I think the industry is going. So I'll use the analogy of your Apple phone, right? I don't know if you're an Apple or Android. I use Apple. You get your phone. There's the native apps that are already loaded for you, but then you have this thing called an app store that allows for you to have endless opportunities to tap into whatever you need. And that's really where I think both SmartRecruiters and TA overall is shifting, is to this notion of hiring without boundaries. The product itself that we offer here, from its core native solutions, are all going to be incredibly progressive and incredibly user-friendly. So user-friendly, flexible, and connected. But at the same time, we're going to be able to open up this whole universe of possibility, whether it's through strategic partnerships in our ecosystem. So really, I think hiring is just almost going to take this pivot where it's not just one system that serves all, but it's how do you plug it in and allow for it to speak to and transfer data and make you connected everywhere, both in terms of the systems that you use, but also how you tap into talent. And that's what I'm most excited about, is to kind of see the evolution that I think we're just at the brink of moving forward into.
Awesome. I need to get a demo to SmartRecruiters, it seems. It seems like you guys are doing a lot of stuff. But awesome. Well, that was really helpful. And I know that learning about your journey and how you've tackled a lot of that change and transformation will be helpful to a lot of the listeners. So thank you very much. And hopefully have you on very soon.
I would love it. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.